Hello folks, in today's video, I'd like to talk about the 20 things that I'd like to see in Path of Exile Settlers of Kalguur. These are just some ideas that I've had, they're in no particular order. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Number one, I'd like them to remove the melee tag from Fortify. So this used to be the case that you tagged something with a melee skill and then you got Fortify, give you your damage reduction, and then you were kind of like rewarded for taking on the risk of getting into melee range of a monster. However, now you need to do a certain amount of damage, and specifically melee damage with a melee skill to get full Fortify stacks. And the problem is that a lot of builds, they take risks to get in close to enemies, and they're not rewarded for it. Especially spell-based builds and minion-based builds. Things like Blade Vortex or Summon Holy Relic, for example. I think these builds should have some access to defensive mechanics. You could make the Fortify gem have generic damage and then make it like proc based off of proximity to the enemy. That's one possibility, but I think there needs to be some change to Fortify to make it a little bit more reasonable for a multitude of builds. Number two, I'd like to see a Spectre bank rework. Right now, there's a limited Spectre bank. It's easy to accidentally lose Spectres, especially with Spell Echo. For example, like let's say you have a spell Spectre going, and then you click Summon Spectre without thinking about it. It raises two Spectres. One is probably the one you wanted. The other one is probably whatever was lying on the ground next to the Spectre. Now you've messed up your Spectre bank. And I know everybody who's played Spectres has done this at some point. It's just painful, right? The other thing too is it's not clear which Spectres are in the bank. You just basically have to just spam Desecrate until you like count it out and like see what's actually in there. Not all Spectres can be desecrated, and so you can't get a full bank. And yeah, so what I would like to see is I'd like to see a UI change so that we can see what's in our Spectre bank. Maybe even have a drop-down menu where we can like choose what Spectres show up in our Desecrate. All right, number three, I think we need to simplify physical mitigation. We need to amalgamate physical mitigation and armor. It's not often clear how much physical mitigation you actually have because you're like doing this weird like hybrid where you're like combining the physical mitigation with the armor, and like armor is really good against smaller hits but not very good against big hits. And for new players, I think that this is kind of a confusing concept. Also, armor doesn't do anything for bleed, but then like you see on your character sheet it says you have a high physical mitigation, but then it doesn't do anything for bleed. So like again, for new players, it's not really clear how physical mitigation works, and I think they could maybe amalgamate some of these things. Maybe get rid of the physical mitigation mod entirely and just tie it into armor. Make armor just give you the physical mitigation and get rid of the scaling versus off like the size of the hit. I think that would be a good way to just simplify physical mitigation for like modern ARPG. Another thing too, I was playing Last Epoch recently, and they have an ability to make armor, a percentage of your armor applied to damage over time effects. I think that would be a really strong mechanic as well, because then you would actually get rewarded for building armor, whereas right now, basically you have to get a bunch of different types of physical mitigation, and you're kind of not rewarded for building armor, even for taking physical type damage. So yeah, I would like to see them simplify the physical mitigation and consolidate it into like one stat. All right, number four, Totem Rework. At low levels, totems feel fine. At high levels, they fall off and they die too soon. Resummoning totems when they die, especially in red tier maps, becomes annoying and costly. Totems have really high mana costs. You can use life tap, then it becomes a really high life cost. When you're playing like really high, like tier 16, tier 17s, monsters start one-shotting your totems. You throw down a totem, it gets like one or two spells off, and then you're summoning it again. It almost feels like you should just be like hand casting. I would like maybe if they gave totems like a can't be damaged over a certain amount of time option that you can get on the mastery. Maybe amalgamate the two nodes that are like make totems immune to stun, and then the one that like they can't be slow below base movement speed. I think they're on two different things now. I think like one is jewel and one is mastery, but like we could maybe get rid of the jewel and put that right into the mastery and make it both. That way, if you're investing into that, then you just get it. I think that would be a good way to solve part of the problem anyway, to make it so they're actually functional. I don't think that the functionality of the totem should be gated behind having to have a specific mastery and a specific jewel. It's just a lot of investment. All right, number 5, I'd like to add a skill opacity slider. So I was recently playing this game, Soulstone Survivors. Soulstone Survivors is like an arcade game, similar to PoE, where like you get a lot of projectiles and overlapping effects, and then at the very top end, it's like insane and chaotic, right? And it's meant to be that way. It's supposed to be like silly, right? But Soulstone Survivors has an opacity slider, so you can turn down the opacity of skills, and you can still see the ground effects. And honestly, if it wasn't in the game would be completely unplayable, because like that game is got even more clutter than PoE, if you can imagine that. But in PoE right now, there's so many overlapping effects. If you play in a party, you get a lot of overlapping skills, a lot of overlapping projectiles, and it becomes difficult to see the ground effects. So I'd like to see them add actually 2 opacity sliders. I'd like to see them add an opacity slider for your own skills and an opacity slider for allied skills. And that way, it'll be easier to see the ground effects, and just in general, it might save your eyeballs from the flashing. Number 6, in-game trade. I'd like to see them add a functionality of the trade website directly into the game. I think certain parts of trading should be automated, specifically currency trading. I don't think there's any reason why I should have to go to somebody's hideout to buy like 3 orbs of fusing or something like that. Like, it's just unnecessary. If you aren't buying over a certain amount, you won't even get a reply anyway, and like that is really frustrating. And then even if you do buy like in a larger bulk, like a 20 or 30 or 100 stack of something, you still might go down the list on the trade site like 5 or 10 or 15 people before you message someone that actually responds to you and wants to trade with you. And then the irony is, it's almost often a bot anyway, so like, what are we doing? Just automate the trading. I understand if you don't want to automate the portion of the trading where you're trading for like crafted items and things like that, that's fine. But like the basic like fragments and currency items, I think that those things should be in some sort of in-game bazaar or auction house, and that all process should be all automated. And also, that would also help solve some of the price fixing issues and just like general scummy issues around trade and scamming anyway. Number 7, add a second character campaign skip. This one also I was thinking of when I was like playing Last Epoch recently. Last Epoch has an ability to go through the dungeons instead of going through the campaign on your second character playthrough. I think this is a great idea. I think when you've played PoE as much as me and a lot of other people, thousands of hours of PoE, you get hundreds of times through the campaign, and it gets kind of stale. Now, I'd actually like to say I love the campaign in PoE. I think it's fantastic. But the truth is, if you've played it 100 times, it doesn't matter how good it is. Any portion of any game played that much is going to become tedious and stale, even if it's amazing, right? Which it is, but it's still tedious. Maybe we need some sort of partial skip. I've seen some YouTubers throw out ideas like, you could add permanent waypoints. So like first time you get a waypoint in each league, then you get to keep that waypoint for other future characters. I think that's a good idea. Another like maybe more out there idea that I had was like you could maybe add a boss gauntlet where like you just do the bosses from the campaign in an arena or something like that. And after each one, you level up like 10 levels or something like that, or maybe not 10 levels, like 3 or 4 levels, and then you just get some like basic blue gear or something to go on. And it's difficult because of the lack of gear, almost like ruthless mode. But then, if you're good at the game and you know how to dodge on the mechanics of the boss fights, it won't matter that your build is a little bit underpowered. You can just go through that with relative ease and quickness. And maybe something like this would be unlocked after killing Katava for the first time, for example. That's just an idea, but I think something kind of needs to be done to kind of like lubricate that second character through the process, because right now it's kind of a little bit tedious. Number 8, bosses and their loot. Now, they went through, GGG went through a bit of a boss overhaul not long ago, and they've added some boss drops to the Atlas, specifically with Scarabs. But I still think like the problem with Scarabs is they're often the most common varieties that drop, so they're not really that exciting. And outside of Scarabs, the bosses aren't really dropping any good, exciting loot. They're also really easy in comparison to rares. Rares are like so dangerous sometimes, and bosses are just kind of like wet noodles. I don't know. I'd like to see them increase the like difficulty of bosses and increase their loot, so they kind of get their like boss feel back a little bit more. So an idea that I had would be adding a random ability per biome. So for example, like all of the sewers bosses might get a choice between 3 or 4 different abilities. Maybe one's like a poison spray. Maybe one is like, I don't know, a grate that summons skeletons underneath you or something like that. I don't know. And then like it's just like random every time you do the boss. So the boss would have like some sort of like different mechanic. And you could even put it on the Atlas tree so you can opt out of it if you didn't want it or something like that. But it would add challenge and give you more loot or something like that, and make each fight kind of a little bit more interesting. That's just an idea, but something to increase the complexity and reward from bosses and increase their loot. All right, number 9 is opt-out only League mechanics. Now, it's no surprise and it's no mystery that Necropolis was not a very well-liked League. I think the biggest issue with Necropolis was the fact that you could not opt out of the League mechanic. There were so many times where I was like, this is painful. Like, I don't want to open up this lantern thing again. And a lot of the mods on the monsters were like extreme too, especially in the first week. I think a lot of new players logged in for the first time for PoE. They booted it up, and they got destroyed by Roas and Mudflats with like added chaos damage. Why is this in the game in a non-skippable function? It's crazy. You're going to kill the return of new players. You know, the other thing too is Path of Exile does have a bit of a tendency to release leagues in bugged, poorly designed, or bad states. And in the past, if that's the case, like for example in Bestiary, there's some weird stuff with the gnats, or like in Delve, you're throwing the like flare the wrong way and things like that. Like there's weirdness there. If you can skip it, then you can wait the week or two while they fix it and it's no issue, right? But if you can't opt out of it, then you're forced to keep on doing it every single time. And especially if it's in a broken or bugged state, that can really maybe cause players to leave early in the league. And I think that's what we saw in Necropolis. All right, number 10, remove rare monsters from Sanctum. So make Sanctum great again. So I think the goal for Sanctum originally was that PoE wanted to slow the game down and add some sort of methodical game mode where like every choice kind of mattered, and it was focused more around the dodging of boss abilities and things like that. Almost kind of like Dark Souls-esque, right? And it was that during the league. And then when they brought it back, they added in rares, and like you've got things like hasted rares in there, and like things that are like, it almost feels like somewhat unavoidable. And like the whole point of the Sanctum was that everything was supposed to be avoidable. So by having things in there that seem busted or unavoidable, it actually defeats the purpose of Sanctum in the first place. And so Sanctum, I think, has actually lost its identity. If you look at the people who are playing Sanctum, there's like a minuscule amount of builds that are actually playing Sanctum. Almost everybody is playing Max Freeze, Temp Chains. They're just locking everything in place because they don't want to lose resolve, right? And nobody's engaging with dodging mechanics in Sanctum. They're trivializing the mechanics because they're broken because of the rares. So I think that this is something that needs to happen. They got to get the rares out of there. They got to revert it to its original state. And I think that Sanctum would be great again. All right, number 11 is a Tier 17 Map Rework. I feel like this one is pretty universal. A lot of YouTubers and streamers are talking about this. It's not just me. I think personally farming should be done in Tier 16s, not Tier 17s. I think they need to remove the quant bonuses and things like that from the Tier 17s, so like people don't want to farm in them. I think they should only be for getting the keys for the Ubers, right? Because GGG stated that the purpose of the T-17 was supposed to act as like a bridge between the T-16s and Ubers, but it's not that at all. It's harder than the Ubers in many cases. The mods are absolutely insane, and only a handful of builds can actually survive in there for any amount of time. And yet the bonuses and the like mods that you get added on to increase loot make it so you're incentivized to do your general league content in the T-17s instead of the T-16s. So now it just reduces build diversity, because like how many builds can actually survive in the Tier 17s? So yeah, it destroys build diversity. It's kind of painful. I don't think it should be mandatory. I feel like T-16s are fine. just rework T-17s. I think that's what needs to happen. Number 12, bring back Metamorph. This one's just going to be a quick one. I liked Metamorph. I was sad to see it go. I was especially sad to see it be replaced with Ultimatum. Personally, I don't like that league, but, you know, to each their own. I'm sure there's lots of people that love Ultimatum or are happy to see it come back. I'd like to see Metamorph brought back in some kind of fashion. I understand that, like, the Tane's laboratory thing was really unpopular. People didn't use it. But, like, the in-map part of it, where you're, like, building the Metamorph, was so much fun. I don't know. I liked it a lot. I'd like to see it come back in some sort of fashion. Number 13. Remove dead stats from the game, please. So this is another thing that I noticed while playing Last Epoch, is that when an item drops in Last Epoch, it's almost, if it's good, if it's almost good, it's usable, because you can craft it to a point where it's good. Whereas in PoE, if you get an item that's almost usable, it's completely useless, because there's probably some dead stats on there that you can't change in any capacity, and you know, that's just, it's tough luck. It goes to the vendor, right? Stats I'm talking about are things like Thorns, Light Radius, bad hybrid mods, right? I feel like in PoE, because of the tiering system, there's already a layer of randomness just because of the tiering system. So for example, if I get like an Astral Plate that's item level 84, I can still have the lowest tiers of mods roll on that Astral Plate. Right? Why? Right? Let's remove some of these lower tiers. Let's get rid of the dead stats entirely. Let's make the items slightly better on average, so that, like, you know, players who are picking up rares from the ground can actually pick up something that's, like, decent, and maybe then craft it to a state where it's slightly better. But right now, there's so many dead stats. And then another thing, and like the reason why I thought about this in the first place, this particular league, was because of Necropolis. I think Necropolis really highlights this problem, because what Necropolis does is it gives you deterministic crafting, where you can remove bad options from the mod pool, right? And actually, Delve does this too, right? And that's the reason why fossil crafting and Necropolis crafting is so powerful, is because it's not just about getting certain mods on there, it's about removing certain mods from coming up. And there's so many garbage mods in PoE that if you can remove certain mods, you just have an infinitely higher chance of getting a better item. Number 14, league-specific party play improvements. So this one's more specific to like Delve and Ritual. I feel like there's a couple league mechanics that like feel really bad in a party. Ritual is probably the worst offender, just because, like, you know, you're doing your ritual, you do your couple rituals, and then your friend is just kind of like standing there while he waits for you to complete your ritual. Delve can be kind of painful too. Like sometimes I feel like I'm playing with a buddy, and then it's like, hey, did you get my portal? Like, what layer are you in right now? Like, can you see me? Can you see my Delve? Like, I don't know. It's kind of painful. I feel like they need to do a little pass over all the league content and make it a little bit more compatible with party play. Number 15, and this one I think is massively important, add a death recap. Currently, it is so difficult to tell what killed you in Path of Exile, especially for new players. You know, there's a lot of hybrid damage in PoE that's not obvious. Things like, you know, electrical slams that are like half physical, half electrical. They show up as blue on the screen. Without looking it up in PoE DB, you probably wouldn't know that it was part physical, right? If you got slammed and you died from it, you're thinking to yourself, hey, I think I need more lightning res. Meanwhile, it's not the lightning damage that's killing you, it's the physical damage that's killing you, right? So adding a death recap would be a huge improvement, especially for new players. Maybe you could break it down, like, you know, damage you took in like the last 5 or 10 seconds before you died. That way players can troubleshoot their builds, find out where they went wrong, and increase their game knowledge in the process. All right, number 16 is a bag space upgrade. In Affliction, we had a bag space upgrade. It was really nice, and I ended up running a lot of Heist that league, and it kind of got me more into Heist, and I found I was enjoying my Heist a lot more when I had the ability to pick up more items. I think that's like one of the limiting factors of Heist. It's like you go through and then you run out of space decently quickly, and you end up leaving a lot of loot on the ground. It kind of feels bad, right? Another thing too is right now, I feel like more loot drops than ever, even with a filter. There is a tendency for new league content to have fragments and consumables. And so, for example, you might be running through a map. The current league has like fragments or splinters of something Like, and then you end up looking in your inventory and it's like you've got like one jeweler's orb, like 3 fusings, a couple omens, a couple of this. Like, it's a lot of different types of things that don't stack with each other. And so it ends up taking up a lot of inventory space. And I feel like the inventory space was designed, 10 plus years ago, when there was a lot less things in the game, and it made sense for the size of the game then. But now it's a little bit outdated, and it does feel like it's a bit constrained. All right, number 17 is one free public stash tab for all players. I think this is really important for new players. It gets them into the system of buying and selling items. And I know, like, some people will say, like, oh, well, GGG, they make their money off of the stash tabs, and if you give them a stash tab, they wouldn't buy any stash tabs. It's absolutely not true. Most of the, like, best stash tabs you get are, like, the specialty stash tabs or, like, the quad stash tab, right? So, like, you get your currency one, your divination card one, your fossil one, etc., right? Players that get into the habit of trading are going to want those more than a player that just plays for free and doesn't get involved with trading at all, right? So I think actually it could even increase revenue and player retention if you gave them one free public stash tab, because it would get them into the game. Now, the downside with that could have to do with some like botting related things, but again, I think there needs to be an overhaul to the whole trade system anyway, so perhaps maybe these things kind of come in tandem. All right, number 18, Refine Scarabs. So there's too many Scarabs that drop currently. A lot of them are completely useless. I think like the idea for GGG was to make it so like you could block the league content that you don't want, and then the Scarabs for the league content that you do want would drop more frequently, and then you can just like run those Scarabs. But the reality is there's so many varieties of Scarabs that even after blocking all of the other league content, you're still not getting Scarabs for your own league content very frequently. So I feel like in SSF, you actually don't end up running Scarabs for your own league content because you simply just don't have them. And you end up like 3-to-1ing Scarabs that are like garbage that you would never use. Or the alternative is just like using inadequate poor Scarabs. And since Sextants were replaced with the Scarabs, I think that that's even more important to kind of like get the drop rate right, so that like players who want to play a certain league mechanic and want to use the Scarabs have like at least one Scarab from that league. It doesn't have to be all of them all the time, but like they should have at least one Scarab from their league content to put in there to make it feel a little bit smoother. All right, number 19 is Consolidation of Status Effect Avoidance. So this is something that really bugs me. Is there's 2 status effect avoidance stats in the game: reduced effect of and chance to avoid. And they don't work with each other, and it causes, not only does it cause bloat on items, but it also is not synergistic with the skill tree. So for example, last league I was running a Necromancer, right? I'm stacking Ghastly Eye Jewels. Ghastly Eye Jewels have the chance to avoid one on it, right? So I'm stacking those, right? I've got like, 50% chance to avoid bleed, 50% chance to avoid shock here and there, whatever, right? Then I path down to the like left side where like you go through like the minion attack speed nodes and whatnot. And on the way there, there's a avoidance cluster that has reduced effect of on it. And I don't want to take any of it because it doesn't work with the chance to avoid. So it's like almost like there's a whole dead stat cluster there. It's like I would love to invest in chance to avoid ailments, but I can't because of where I am on the tree. So what I think that they need to do is remove one, change the rest to the other, and just get rid of all those extra affixes because it's just so much bloat. Also, there's a lot of statuses in PoE, okay? You've got like what? Brittle, Sap, Ignite, Shock, Chill, Freeze, Bleeding, Corrupted Blood, Maim, like the list goes on, right? And so like making it easier to like cap out on some of these would be really convenient because there's already so many in the game. Like it's going to be hard to cap out on all of them anyway, even with without the reduced effect versus chance to avoid being there together. All right, and then my last one, number 20, is kind of a meme, but Gladiator Rework, okay? Very few players are playing Gladiator. I feel like the Ascendancy feels really constrained and limited. It's almost always outclassed by an Ascendant or a Deadeye. The Ascendant, you get the fizz damage over time, and then you have the ability to pick up something from another class. Like you can get the Pathfinder Flask effect, or Flask Charge gain, which is really good. Or like Deadeye, you get like the puncture thing. Or rupture, sorry, not puncture. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like even when I'm playing Bleed, I don't want to go Gladiator, and that's like supposed to be its thing. I feel like the Vengeance and like those nodes are kind of bad. You take the two big physical nodes, and then after that, it's like, where do I put my other points? Like, nothing really is like, I don't really want anything else, right? And then like, yeah, you look at like Champion, for example, that has perma Fortify, or like Slayer that has Overleach, and it's like, what does this class have that's like so OP and unique to Gladiator that I need to take Gladiator for? And the answer is really not much. Potentially Bleed in general needs a rework, actually. There's very few ways of scaling Bleed. It's just like increased physical damage, more Fizz damage, and Fizz multi. And there's nodes down there on the tree for that, but I don't know. It definitely feels kind of stale. Hopefully there's a mini Bleed rework, and then with that we get a Gladiator rework. Alright, so that's it for today. That's my 20 things that I'd like to see in Settlers of Kalguur. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave a comment. And we're currently on the road to 1,000 subs. When I hit 1,000 subs, I get monetized. That would be fantastic. I can make more videos like this. So if you like the video, like and definitely subscribe. See you guys later. See ya in the new expansion. I'll be there. Peace.